This is Into the Singleverse with Raj Verma. Unfiltered conversations about the latest trends and the tangible effects of real-time data on pivotal industries, our daily lives, and the future of our world.
My guest this week is Vinod Khosla. Vinod is the founder of Khosla Ventures, where he focuses on investing in bold technology ideas that can disrupt massive industries. He was previously a co-founder of Daisy Systems and a founding CEO of Sun Microsystems, where he pioneered open systems and commercial RISC processes. Vinod is not just a successful entrepreneur and investor. At his core, he is a mentor and an advisor, driven by a desire to create positive change through technology. He has a passion for empowering entrepreneurs and believes business can be a force for good. Vinod, welcome into the Singleverse.
Great to be here.
Excellent. You and I have spoken about it. As I was growing up in India and, doing computer science and, you were always an inspiration for all of us. You had started a company that we all looked up to, and later I worked for, which was Sun Microsystems. And so tell us a little bit about your early life and leading up to Sun and the idea around Sun. That'll be a good way to get this conversation started, I suppose.
One thing that's always intrigued me is starting a company. A long time ago, I read the story of Intel starting up and Andy Grove, a Hungarian immigrant, starting that company in Silicon Valley. That caught a fire in my imagination and convinced me to go start a company. As soon as I was done with college, I actually jumped into wanting to do a startup, came to Silicon Valley, did my first startup, which is a CAD tools company called Daisy Systems. Quite successful, went IPO, did very well. Three of us started it. What I realized was there was no computing platform on which one could develop applications like Daisy. So we spent more money developing our platform on which to build the CAD applications. And I was an electrical engineer. Then we spent on the application itself. And that's what got me to think about starting a platform company. Looked around, saw the technology at Stanford. Sun actually stands for Sun University Net, Stanford University Net, which was where the name came from. And so that was pretty exciting, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I guess, one thing that I've always found in our conversations for you, impossible is just an opinion. And I think you made a lot of things that seemed impossible absolutely not only possible, but part of everyday life. Vinod, I've always admired your vision around seeing around corners into the future, some would say. And I remember, I think it was almost 10, 12 years ago when you wrote an article which said, doctors are going to be a thing of the past. So just to have a little provocative start to this conversation, what are your next couple of predictions about the next 10, 20 years?
One of the things technology always excited me was how much transformation it can drive. When I started Sun, the microprocessor was just coming on the scene, and it sounded silly to me, and that was the whole crux of the idea of Sun. It sounded silly to me that Digital Equipment Corporation, VAX, most people don't remember the company, which was the dominant computer company, maybe the number 2 computer company in the world, after IBM, you had to take a processor roughly the same power and share it among lots and lots of users when it cost $100 for a microprocessor. That idea led to Sun, but it also led to the idea of TCP/IP. So Sun adapted TCP/IP in 1982. And I've seen these transformations go on from time to time. As I argue, when I said in 1982, if you had a desk at Sun, you were required to have email. None of the pink slips for messages. That was 1982, and people laughed when I said in 1985, grandma will use email or a PC. It's constantly been the case. When 1995 came along, we bet on TCP/IP as an exponential growth technology. When every major telco I talked to said two things. I actually remember AT&T telling me nobody needs more than ISDN at home, 64 kilobits. And TCP/IP is too flaky a system, so we will use ATM technology. 1996, we started Juniper. This large technology transformation has always gone on. And what it takes is some sort of driver, usually an instigator, an individual, who causes all that change to happen. Come back to your question. I've seen these large transformations brought around by technology, and literally nobody believed TCP/IP was important in 1996 when we started Juniper, which was a natural succession to Sun. As you remember, Sun used to say the network is the computer. We needed a networking tool like TCP/IP, and Juniper was a 2,500x return on a $3 million kind of investment, initial investment, which is about $7 billion in return. That was in those days, in the 90s. I have followed these trends constantly. We can talk about them in any dimension, and there's infinite dimensions to go to. But it was in 2012 I first wrote two blogs that you're talking about. One was called Do We Need Doctors? And the second was called Do We Need Teachers? And to be fair, I imagined humans doing the human element of medical care and the human element of education, which is probably 10% or 20% of what they do today. I didn't think I wanted to eliminate them. In fact, my big paper was then called 20% Doctor Included for the human element of care. But the idea that a physician can keep up with the last 5,000 articles on breast cancer when they're treating a breast cancer patient, research study, is preposterous. We have too much information for humans to keep them in their head. And when you start connecting things like cancer patients with cardiac disease, with other diseases, it gets extremely complex. So I've always imagined complexity will be handled by computers. And 5 years ago, when it was not very hot, we invested in OpenAI. So it's been exciting to see the vision of doctors and teachers come together. My wife runs CK12, a nonprofit that's doing AI tutors for every kid on the planet. And I believe they can be near free. My son's working on a primary care doctor, which I'm very, very excited about. But we also have companies working on cardiologists and physical therapists and, frankly, all manner of human expertise. That's sort of within the AI domain. I would say there's so many other domains in which technology can make a difference. I'm quite convinced we can replace cost-effectively every coal and natural gas plant in this country well before 2050 using fusion. So we are working on fusion. I think we can replace the majority of cars in most cities with a very different notion of public transit, radically reinvented, where it's always faster than cars, always on demand, not on a schedule, and it can get from anywhere to anywhere at a very cost-effective price. No matter where I look, that's possible. I think the sources of food, plant proteins, will change radically over the next 25 years, in my view. AI-based intelligence will see probably 1 billion bipedal robots within the next 25 years. So I could go on and on. Music and entertainment will be reinvented. Climate is, of course, a big issue. Lots of work to do there. So I could go on forever.
And it's very, very fascinating. What do you think? Do you think in our lifetime or in the next couple of decades, you would see the 20% developer emerge, so as to speak, taking from your 20% doctor included?
Almost certainly it'll happen. The way I would think about the software developer, everybody below the median developer will be eliminated, maybe a higher number. That will become natural language programming, which we are starting to see. Below that, you shouldn't need to write SQL. You should explain what you want, and the system writes the SQL and accesses the database. The great developer will become excellent, and the 10x developer will be way more powerful than they are today. You will need developers to architect systems. You will need 10x developers to visualize highly complex systems. So I do think they'll have a pretty large role, but hugely amplified. My bet is the top 10% of developers will do more work than 100% of developers today.
That's fascinating.
It's worth talking at the bottom end. A system like Replit, I don't know if you're familiar with the system or your audience is, will allow 1 billion people to become programmers because it'll be close to natural language.
So what sort of, and I've asked you this question, I've been fascinated by your response to this. I'm a father of 4, and 2 of my older kids are pursuing STEM-related studies in UC Berkeley. And so if you think that education in computer programming is still something that you would encourage youth to get into, or you think there are other domains that you would encourage them to seek?
So let me suggest the following. As a general direction, not 100% truth, the need to work in human society will disappear. People will work because they want to work on what they want to work on, not because they need to work to earn an income. So suddenly, even the artists will become a better job because they are doing it for their passion. Having said that, and I often get asked, how should people train for this world? And I think the most important thing is to develop the mind properly for young people. And I do think computer science, engineering, and STEM in general develops the mind in ways that is going to be generally more useful. My advice today is don't become a specialist in one narrow area. Do as broad an education as possible, at least at the undergraduate level. Then if you want to do a PhD in electrical engineering or biotechnology, that's fine. But try and do something broad so you can pivot into a number of different areas. The whole notion of chips and software at this scale didn't exist when I went to college in 1971. But because of my broad training, and my master's degree was in biomedical engineering after my degree in electrical engineering, and then I got an MBA, I was able to move as the world of technology moved, and able to pursue my passion to have technology have more and more impact. So I talked about how Sun started. It was very, very tactical. It was nothing super strategic. But over time, I've realized the power of technology to make a huge positive difference on humankind, whether it is on energy production in fusion or better sustainable aviation fuel, you pick your area, or food sources. So what I would say is get as broad an education and keep learning. So learn enough to keep learning new areas and develop a certain style of thinking in your brain, and you will be able to respond as the world changes, and it will change.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just getting onto the topic of entrepreneurship, one of the reasons I became an entrepreneur was because of you and the conversation you and I had a few years ago. So, what do you think are the key attributes, characteristics that makes a successful entrepreneur, in your opinion?
I would say entrepreneurs generally are optimistic. Skeptics never did the impossible. Can you imagine this? You can give 100 reasons why Elon Musk couldn't be successful at starting a car company, let alone an EV car company, which didn't exist practically back then. Entrepreneurs are optimistic. I think entrepreneurs have very rapid learning rates. They get in the field and they engage. And they rapidly iterate and adjust what they're doing. And you look for those characteristics. They have a passion for their vision, but yet seek lots of input and are willing to adjust their vision as input comes in. It's an unusual combination. They're obstinate and they're really flexible. I would say really good entrepreneurs are very obstinate about their vision and very flexible about their tactics. So a couple of characteristics. They also build awesome teams. They're not afraid to hire strong teams.
That is, yeah, one of the advice that you gave me was, Raj, it's like a Formula One driver. If you go too fast, you'll crash. If you go too slow, you'll lose the race. And that's something I grapple with almost on a daily basis. But your advice has been very, very useful. Your take on innovation has always been intriguing to me. You tell the story about one of the companies you were on the board of, and they raised some money, and you said something like, "Yeah, let's raise an extra 50 million." As long as you are ready to quote unquote waste it. Tell us a little bit about entrepreneurs and innovation and their almost addiction to innovation and how that has changed the trajectory of companies.
People don't like failing. And I like to say my willingness to fail is what causes me to succeed. And the big difference is, unless you try risky things, you're not going to do things different than everybody else. The market is very competitive. And hence, one area in which you can differentiate is take larger risks for larger changes and larger innovation. Now, the key to that is if you fail, you don't want to lose your company. So you want to take risks, which might set you back a little bit. But if they succeed, they double the market opportunity of your company. So asymmetric risks, very much in the Nassim Taleb sense, is what matters. And he's written on this topic. I always say, if you took 0.5% or 1% of your market cap, and that applies to a 5-person company and a 5,000-person and 50,000-person company. If you take 0.5% of your market cap and put it on 10 projects, every time you lose 0.5% of your market cap. But if you win, you double your market cap. I'll give you a classic example. At Square Cash was this thing that was one of these experiments. And now is the dominant part of what I think is perceived as the company's market cap. And other experiments that failed shouldn't really count. So I like to say failure doesn't count if it's intelligent failure and the right size of failure. But I'm very, very excited by this notion that you can encourage people to try things that might fail, might even be likely to fail. But if you try enough of them, you have 5% downside in this formula and 500% upside.
Yeah, no, that has been a very valuable lesson for me personally, and here at SingleStar, I think our success, our modern success, is greatly attributable to the rate of innovation and our addiction to that. So thanks for that advice. Naturally, the topic of AI is extremely hot right now. You saw around corners there. Tell us about your first experience when you started hearing about or spoke to OpenAI and their vision, and what got you to back them. I believe you're one of the largest investors in OpenAI. And then the second part of the question, of course, is where do you see OpenAI and AI at large going in the next few years or the next decade or so?
So, thing one has to do is bet when others aren't betting on something. we've seen hot trends and everybody's doing the same thing, and then you get bubbles. We've seen that repeatedly over the last 40 years I've been dealing with innovation. So you have to decide what is important, will have a large impact, and sustain through ups and downs. I wouldn't use the word it was very clear to me, but it was clear to me that it was likely, not guaranteed, that AI would have a huge impact. And so about 5 years ago, when we invested in OpenAI, 10 years ago is when I'd written about the idea and thought about, do we need doctors' expertise? Do we need teachers to teach students? And all kinds of other things, from robotics, which is really dependent on AI intelligence, to drug discovery and all those other areas of AI. So we placed a bet. In fact, we placed the largest bet I've ever placed in the 40 years I've been in venture capital by a factor of 2. The largest initial bet I've placed in 40 years by a factor of 2. And that has worked out very well. But it was this belief that AI was going to be important. And there was no real hot trend then. It wasn't this area where every corporation, every investor had to be in AI. And that's the right kinds of bets to place. I think it's going to affect all aspects of our life. But what I would say in an encouraging way here is we're not done with AI. We are less than 10% of the journey towards AGI. And my personal belief, even sitting here today, is large language models will be very, very important, but not the only AI technique. So we're spending time on what might look like a large language model 4 years from now. For example, we've invested in symbolic logic, probabilistic programming techniques to achieve the kinds of Bayesian thinking human beings do. So I look at human intelligence and types of human intelligence, from creativity to logic and reasoning to others. Very likely, some of these things will emerge in large language models as emergent behavior of those models. But it's also very likely there'll be other add-ons that help AI become more versatile, broader, and eliminate most of the criticism you see today. Skeptics point to what's wrong with it today. I always tell our team, look 2 years out, and most of the problems you're dealing with will be much, much smaller. Whether it's hallucination or the occasional logical or reasoning error. I'll give you an example. There are people training coding. Nobody imagined LLMs could code 5 years ago. Write code. I think that capability will significantly enhance or get much better over the next 5 years. We are far from done. I don't think people will ever do an API integration. They'll just tell the AI to do an integration for them. And APIs may still be needed, but the English language will be the way you do an integration. Just tell it to integrate. And if it needs clarity, it'll ask you those questions. I would venture to guess half of IT departments 15 years from now will be gone. I only point to the following fact. In the 1920s, I believe, most corporations in the US had a VP of electricity. Those roles are gone. I'm not suggesting the CIO will be gone, but half of the IT function. Take the very common function of BI, or business intelligence. You have a business user who specifies something that they want done. The data analyst then turns it into SQL and into a query. Business analyst should be able to say, hey, do this report for me. But they could go beyond and say, in the last 3 months or last quarter's data, what should I be looking at? What's an anomaly? So they don't even know the question they should be asking or the report. And AI should be able to answer a question without IT people involved. So I do think we're going to see a very, very different world coming up. Much more capability, much less IT, much fewer IT people. You'll still need 20%, hugely amplified by AI. So all very exciting.
Probably coming to the end of our time with you, I've always sought your advice as a CEO. What advice do you have for us leaders in tech or otherwise in this fast evolving field of AI? Do you think the notion of leadership and organizations and organization structure will change dramatically over the next decade or so? And if so, what are some of the things that you should look out for to be successful?
A decade is a short time in which to see some of these changes. Some of the things I'm talking about, how you handle business processes in your company, that will change well within the 10 years. You won't need a UiPath or automation anywhere or those kinds of clunky old systems. I think you'll still need great data architecture in a company. I think you'll mostly, from a leadership point of view, change the culture from tomorrow's going to be like yesterday, which is sort of a good paradigm for most people. What has worked for the last 10 years or 20 years or 30 years will probably not work. Whether it's in marketing, whether it's in product design, it's kind of people you have. And just because it's ambiguous as to what you will need doesn't mean you will not need to change. And leadership will be about putting a much more dynamic thinking organization, stretching their thinking, have them look at what might come from left field to affect your business. It's that kind of organization, which is very, very different from, I know in 5 years, it'll still be our business kind of approach to life and will be dominant. In fact, for incumbents, their existing customers will be a huge advantage in making a transformation and being the consultant that brings all the latest approaches to them. That's the recipe for growth, the recipe that says I have my customers locked in and I can be insulated. That won't work very much.
That's great. So, Vinod, you always surprise me as to how you sort of drink your own champagne or eat your own dog food in terms of innovation. And you're telling me a story about how you use AI a lot more than most common people do, and how you wrote a song for your daughter's either upcoming wedding or wedding. And how did that go? And why don't you share that experience with our listeners?
I'm probably in the bottom 1% of people when it comes to music capability. I wrote the speech I was going to give, but then I told ChatGPT to turn that speech, that emotion I wanted to express, into a rap song. And it did the lyrics. I then entered the lyrics into a new AI called Splash.ai that did the whole rapping, the instrumentals, the voice, the singing, the whole bit. So I was able to play a very, very personal message in a rap song, a capability I couldn't even remotely have imagined. And that's a great example. I didn't have that capability, now I do.
That's great. And was there a big round of applause at the end of that?
Oh, people loved it. The quality was really high. I'd recommend everybody trying this.
No, that's fascinating. The stage is yours for any concluding remarks that you might have.
I might give you a couple of parting comments. Because of the exponential rate of growth in technology, the next 10 years, we will see more change than we've seen in the last 25 years. So if you want to look at how different 2033 will be from today, 2023, you have to go back into the 1990s and say, how different is today from 1990s? That's a good way to think about it. The implication is leaders will have to be much more dynamic in their thinking, much more dynamic in their organization. So we are used to, as engineers, optimizing systems by X or Y, most throughput in a database. My bet is future IT systems, future organizations, future company configurations will be optimized for change, not for optimizing a particular function. And that's a good way to think about it. My last comment would be, I find most people are more limited by what they think they can do than what they can actually do.
That's fascinating. I can't resist this last question, so I do apologize. And I've just been fascinated by, you said entrepreneurs and you said thought leaders, much like yourself. You have something which, I don't know if I'll ever have, or it can be learned. And I've been fascinated by some of the routines that gifted individuals like you sort of follow. So if you don't mind, what's your morning routine look like?
Well, my routine is pretty flexible. I make sure I get enough exercise, which is usually hiking. It's my favorite form of exercise because I can both exercise, go on a 3-mile hike, and I like to go uphill a lot, so I can maximize cardiac exercise in the shortest period of time. And it's also a great way to listen to podcasts and learn something. That's sort of almost my salvation away from the office and email and all those things. Those things keep me clean and fresh in my head.
That's fascinating. So again, I promise you this will be the last question. I just thought about this. I remember this was 7 years ago or something like that. You and I first met, and it was a quote-unquote interview for CEO. Actually, it was from MSQL. And it was by far and away the most unusual interview I've ever had, because the normal things are about, jobs and all the rest of it. And I came out just completely fascinated, because it was like an interview I had never had before, because you didn't ask me any question that I've been asked in all my previous interviews. How do you interview? What's your thought process when you're interviewing a candidate for, say, one of your portfolio companies?
Connecting it back to the idea that we need to be in a dynamic world. Whenever I ask somebody what they did in their last job, they know what answer to give. Everybody's smart enough to say, I did X and Y, and I don't know among the 100 people in the company in that department who was responsible for what, but everybody knows how to take credit and give the right answer. So it is very, very misleading to ask them about their last 5 jobs. And it's useful. But what I like to do is interview people in context that they haven't thought about before, because I'm trying to understand how they think about things. For example, if I say, if you joined startup X, how would you approach this problem? New contexts are very valuable in learning how somebody thinks and how will they think. Saying who are the 3 people you would hire and why tells me what kind of team they will build and why they would select that team. So one has to be indirect in an interview. The goals are the same. I'm trying to understand how people think, how dynamic they will be, how well can they do in a context which they don't understand. What's the first principles thinking they're showing, even in areas they don't know, what kind of team they will hire. So I ask a lot of hypothetical questions, not what they've done in the past, what they've already thought about, already know the glib answer for. So I have a fairly unusual technique to determine what fundamentally are people like.
Yeah, and that was, that was probably the most thinking I had to do in an interview in my life. But it got me here, so thank you for that.
I've heard that comment from many an interview I've done. I was stretched hard to think about things I didn't know about.
You really did. Thank you, Vinod. Thank you for your time. As I said, it's a privilege and an honor to have you here. Thanks for your mentorship, and I wish you all the very best for the day and for the year ahead.
It's great to be here, and I hope I say to your audience, they got something out of this, and they can imagine the possible and then try and make that happen with technology. It's a wonderful way to live.
And that's it for this episode of Into the Singleverse. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to automatically receive future episodes. Additionally, I would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a review, helping others like you discover the show. I'll see you next time.
This was Into the Singleverse with Raj Verma. If you want to learn how to unleash the immense power of data, go to singlestore.com. Into the Singleverse is a production of Forbes Books.